Natural Law, Class 9. Immaculate Heart of Mary, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Now, if I remember at the bottom of your notes, we were going to talk about how euthanasia destroys the medical profession, but I'm going to actually do that tomorrow because I want to give something else in front of that, and that is the manual pro-lifers know this well, fairly well. Actually, take that back. A lot of pro-lifers don't know this. They should. But people who really study the issue know this. Binding and hoch. Binding spelled just like binding, and hoch, H-O-C-H-E. Now I forget who was who. One of them is a physician and the other is a legal scholar. And here is what they had to say regarding euthanasia and mercy killing and that type of business. They say, arguments for this legislation, that is the terminating the life of another person, has recently been heard, and the motto of this movement has become the right to death with dignity. By dignity with death, we don't only mean the right to die with dignity, but much more, the legally acknowledged right to complete relief of an unbearable life. In other words, the complete termination of unbearable life. Now, there's a lot of modern so-called ethicists and doctors who talk this way, such as Professor Peter Singer from Princeton University, Dr. Jack Kevorkian, who's also known as Dr. Death, Derek Humphrey, the founder of the Hemlock Society, which advocates quote-unquote legalized euthanasia for all ages. We're going to probably get to that tomorrow. But this quote was not taken from any recent author. It was taken from a book written in 1920 in Liebig's, Germany. What's called The Time of the Weimar Republic. And the title of the book is, it translates strange from the German, but I'll say it. The release of the destruction of life devoid of value. Okay? The relief of the destruction of life devoid of value. And what does this harken back to? This harkens back to what we talked about in the previous class about California medicine. Saying that there are two standards of ethics. The old Western ethic that says that life itself has inherent value because of what it is. And the new ethic that says life has a relative value depending on what it can do, what it does, what its state of health is. There's all types of ways that we could apply this relative value. Because once you put a relative value on something, that value can change. And the idea of who should live and who should die and what is a meaningful life, that can all change. But the point is that these doctors, Binding and Hoch, were writing in the Weimar Republic. And basically, this book catalyzed the development of the euthanasia movement in Germany during the Weimar Republic in the 1920s until the rise of Hitler. So what we see then in the old book, ideas have consequences. And what these men are writing about in an academic, legal, or medical journal that someone would laugh at and say, God, that's not possible, comes to be the actual program of an entire nation. So what we see then is that Hitler, as bad as he was, monster that he was, he didn't invent euthanasia. He didn't invent this euthanasia mercy-killing system. It was already ready-made for him during the Weimar Republic, that is, during the time of what you would call a democratic republic. In other words, a nation that's kind of like the United States. These things were already ready-made for him, and he just took it and picked them up and took it to their logical extreme. I wouldn't say logical extreme, maybe logical end. Because once you start thinking according to these false principles, you will. This is why the great popes of the past, when they were talking about an erroneous principle, they would tell you the consequences of it. It would be when Pius XII was going after the new theology and this idea that truth can change over time and doctrine can change over time. He says, if this is allowed to continue, what will become of the end-changing dogma of the Catholic faith, and what will become of the unity and stability of the faith? He could see the consequences because he was a Thomist and objective. He knew how to think objectively without getting his emotions or even what he would prefer, his personal preferences in the way, and followed it to its logical conclusion. And he has been proven correct. We are living now in the post-conciliar church the warning through the effects of the bad theology that he warned against. Okay, he warned about in 1946. Most people would have looked at it and said it could never happen. This type of destruction could never happen. He didn't go into detail. He knew the principles, and he knew where it was going to end up. And the same thing with these euthanasia principles. Once you shift the whole thinking from I am master of my life and I decide what kind of life is valuable, once you go to that from what we talked about the other day, that our life does not belong to us, is a gift from God, and I think we quoted Aquinas somewhere, that God is the master of life. He giveth life, he taketh away, to both the good and the evil. He says something like that. So, the release of the destruction of life devoid of value. Our good friend, Dr. Dennis Bennett, wrote an article about this in 1980 in the Social Justice Review. July, August 1960, and it's called, Is the United States Becoming the Fourth Reich? Because he was looking at these binding and Hawk principles and seeing the parallels that are starting to form in the United States. In the 1980, what was the great slogan for euthanasia? And probably, I don't know that we hear it so much today because I don't hear television, but the big slogan was death with dignity. They probably still use it. Death with dignity. Okay, death is a new human right, and if they're going to hand out human rights, then I'm going to stand in line and get mine, which is I get to kill myself, or I get to kill somebody else who is deemed not worth living. So, what Dr. Bennett did, and I'm following through here, is he laid out the 6 basic points of binding and Hawk of the book. The first is that man is man is born sovereign of his life. Okay. Okay, so already this indirectly shifts this to an atheistic system. You've not got out of the picture. Man is born sovereign of his life. But as we know, life is a gift from God. God gives and God taketh away. The fifth commandment says, thou shalt not kill. And as we said before, the fuller understanding of that is thou shalt not directly take the life of the innocent or the helpless. Okay, so that's point number one. Man is sovereign of his life. Number two, I'll just call this change. We're going to change how we look at euthanasia practices. Euthanasia, they say, where did I put my glasses? Here they are. Euthanasia, they say, I'm going to quote now, it is only important to consider the change of a painful cause of death, originating in an often life-lasting illness, to a less painful but different cause of death. Okay, I'll read that again, and you tell me what they're saying. It is only important to consider the change of a painful cause of death originating in an often life-lasting illness to a less painful but different cause of death. In layman's terms, what are they saying?
They're saying we'll kill him so he doesn't die. they're saying to alleviate. They're trying to say to alleviate pain.
Yeah, but what's really happening here? He's going to die anyway.
Yeah.
That is how they're arguing. And he's going to die anyway. So since he's going to die anyway, we are only going to change the manner of his death. What's so bad about that? When they say change to a less painful but different cause of death, these authors are not talking about just removing extraordinary means. Okay, somebody's on a life support system or something like that, which, of course, we are bound to ordinary means to save our lives. We're not bound to extraordinary means, okay? But they don't mean that. What they mean is...
actually taking them out.
But what do they call it?
Kind helper?
They call it a kind helper, yes. We are going to shorten the man's painful life on earth, and this is compassion. This is the way you talk about a dog, of course. The dog is, remember Father Marion, why don't you put a bullet in its brain?
What was that for?
In Jersey, we had this old dog named Bones. He was all crippled and arthritic, and he had cataracts. You would see him walking into walls, and he was just thoroughly decrepit. And Father Marion always used to say, you should put this dog to sleep because he's in pain. And he would say, why don't you put a bullet in its brain? But that's how you talk about a dog, okay? That's how you talk about an animal. That's how we see in various stories and various movies that the horse is so maimed and in such excruciating pain that they take the horse down. They put the horse down. They're applying this to human life. They call it a kind helper, and because we're doing what was going to happen anyway, then we can call this kind helpful a form of natural healing. Remember what Monsignor Smith said, all social engineering is preceded by verbal engineering. They have to make it palatable, and they have to do it by means of the language.
Can you repeat that? What you said before?
I don't know what I said before. Well, the kind helper, they will say this is not killing, but it's actually a form of natural healing. They use that term, natural healing. It
doesn't heal anything.
No. Killing someone doesn't heal them. What you do is, the purpose of the medical profession is you try to heal people so that they don't die. Okay?
Yeah.
This is a death as healing. It is a pro-death anti-life ethic. Okay, number 3. The book relies on an ends that justifies the means rationale. So 3. For change 2, we'll put kind helper so we know what we're talking about. Kind helpful / natural healing. Okay, so that's point number 2. Point number 1, man's born sovereign of his life. Point number 2, the change, kind, helpful, natural healing. Point number 3, end justifies the means. I'll read you the quote. We're not dealing here, Dr. Binding, so I guess he's the medical doctor. We're not dealing here with an unlawful killing, but with an unprohibited healing action carried out with the blessing of the sufferer, as a pain relief for the nearly dead, since this is not done for the purpose of killing them, but to relieve suffering. Okay, so that's why they claim that it's healing. We're going to relieve suffering. It's like saying we're going to solve the problem of...
We're going to starve you so you're not hungry.
We're going to solve the problem of poverty by killing the poor. We kill the poor. We don't have a poverty problem anymore. We let them starve to death. We don't have a poverty problem. Same here. We kill the sufferer. We end his suffering. So remember, too, they always try to sound humane. Why? Because when we were quoting Father Smith in his Natural Law booklet, the fact that men recoil from death, men recoil from killing. You naturally recoil from it. And that is the natural law at work inside the human being.
Even people when they come back from war.
Yeah. So, in order to camouflage and do the sleight of hand and make something that is abhorrent acceptable, they have to manipulate the language to make the person believe that this is actually a form of healing and relieving them of suffering. Okay? So that's number 3. Number 4, we'll call this point from voluntary to enforced euthanasia. I'll just abbreviate euthanasia here. Okay, point number 4 is from voluntary euthanasia to enforced euthanasia. And keep in mind, they're doing this all in this one book. They are moving from point to point to point to point. Okay, it's the natural, logical progression of this bad thinking. Bad thinking, a small error in the beginning is a big error in the end. Aquinas or Aristotle, I forget which one, I think it's Aquinas, says small error in the beginning, big error in the end. Why? Because you will follow the logic of the bad thinking. There is what Dr. Predates calls the natural metaphysics of human intelligence, where you are going to follow along the principles.
Because if you stop following them, then you have to admit that they're flawed.
Well, a lot of times, yeah. If and people will do this. People who had been on a bad road of thinking get their thinking straightened out somehow, and then they say, "Gosh, I just wasted the last 15 years of my life following these bad principles. Oh, if I could only get those years back." But better that than go to the grave with those bad principles. So, okay, following the logic, we have to move from voluntary euthanasia to enforced euthanasia. Here's what he says. Here's what Binding says. Granting death with dignity is not dependent on the consent of the tortured sick person. He actually says that. It doesn't rest on their consent. We professionals will decide that this life is not worth living. And we see what's happened. We've moved from a defense of suicide to a defense of murder. Taking human life without the consent of the victim. Tomorrow, when we're going to see how these are unfolding in our time, there was a 1991 document from the Netherlands that said, it's part of how the euthanasia destroys the medical profession, is how many doctors in the Netherlands just killed their patients. Because euthanasia is acceptable, and maybe they thought this person just wasn't worth working on. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay, now up to now we've been talking about people who are terminally ill. They're going to die anyway. Where do you think we're going to go next?
People who aren't fit to live in the first place.
And what kind of people are they?
Deformed. Exactly.
That's point number 5. Exactly. We move from the advocate of taking the life. We move to the advocacy of taking the life of what they call incurable idiots. No matter if they were born this way or if they have become like this at the last stage of suffering. Okay? So.
Can you repeat point 5?
Terminally ill to incurable idiots. Okay, that's the term that they use. Incurable idiots. Again, I'll say it again. Taking the life, quote, of incurable idiots, no matter if they were born this way or if they have become like this one at the last stage of suffering. And they have the German efficiency, which says, it would be best to apply for death with dignity as soon as incurable idiocy has been confirmed. So, there's no point in delaying, no point in keeping them alive, no point in extending the life of what they call a useless eater, just consuming food that other people could have. But apply this so-called death with dignity as soon as we recognize. Also, if they do that as soon as they recognize incurable idiocy, there's no time to discern whether there might have been a misdiagnosis. But that's another point. Now, they say that this, Binding and Huck say that this is to apply to the young and the old, and then Dr. Bind takes it to the next logical step. His book suggests that we should, I'll quote directly, quote, extend this charity to those born severely deformed. The little baby is born, he's severely deformed. The mother says, oh, my poor baby. Dad says, oh, my poor baby. The doctor says, just kill it. We'll do it for you. In fact, you have a duty to kill it, because it's cruel to keep a suffering creature like that alive. And then finally, number 6.
Wait, that was an extension of point 5?
Yes.
That wasn't
terminally ill to the incurable idiots. And also you could put, if you want the bullet point, all stages of life. And next little point under 5, including severely deformed. We see time and time again with each of this is an application of the relative quality of life rather than life having intrinsic value on its own, human life that is. Number 6, the easiest thing is you just put a dollar sign. The economic aspect. The economic argument was primarily advanced by Dr. Huck. And this is again post-World War I, pre-Hitler Germany. A democratic state, so-called. This was published. And Dr. Hook says, incurable... I'm sorry. He's talking about the cost of keeping incurable idiots alive. And he says, concerning the economy, those full idiots are imposing the greatest burden on the environment and society, while at the same time they are serviced by persons who are able to live normal lives. I have found that the average expenditure per idiot, I guess I call that EPI, expenditure per idiot, for a year is 1,300 marks. Now, I don't know what that is, but what that actually costs in our understanding of dollar value. But it's introducing the idea that it's cheaper to kill...
And more convenient.
To kill the inferior life than keep it alive. So you can put that cheaper to kill. Cheaper to kill inferior life than keep it alive. Again, and once you introduce killing as the answer to a social problem, watch out. Because any pretext can be used. That's why I said these people who say you got to do away with religion and let men be free. I think I quoted it before. I'll bring it into the next class. The number one killer in the 20th century was atheistic governments killing their own people.
Stalin, Hitler,
China, Cambodia. I mean, you go right there. It's in.
Roe versus Wade. That was
It's in our friend's book. Berlinski, David Berlinski's book, The Devil's Delusion. He has a whole list of the 20th century. They were killed by, and if you remember, I talked about that before. With Dostoevsky said, if God does not exist, then anything's possible. And so, Dr. Burnett, writing about this in 1980, he quotes Congressman Walter Sackett, Representative Walter Sackett, a physician and sponsor of Florida euthanasia laws. And he basically talks about the cost of keeping a severely retarded person alive. It's going to cost the various states over the same period $100 billion. And when one thinks of what one could do with this money in other fields, it's a question of cost-benefit. Okay, so he's talking just cost. It's not worth it to keep these idiots alive. What's the term I used for them? Expenditure per idiot. Okay, yeah. It's not worth it to keep them alive. So, we're going to review these 6 stages, and then we're going to close for the day. First, Binding and Hawk says, man is sovereign over his own life. Second, the kind helper, the natural healing. We should make it possible for those who are severely ill to choose an alternative manner of death. I'm going to die anyway. I'm just going to pull it up a couple of years. And it's my life. I am sovereign of my life. I'm elderly. Also, as we're going to see tomorrow, they're introducing this, that 12-year-olds legally can make this decision to kill myself. Belgium did it. And I think, I don't know if Canada is quite there yet. Okay, third, ends justifies the mean argument that in order to put the person out of their misery or to put that person out of my misery, we can kill him. Fourth, we move there from advancing death with dignity without consent, with consent of the victim, to without consent, enforced. The fifth, terminally ill, incurable idiots. We move to advocating the termination of life of incurable idiots and do this as soon as we learn of their condition, as soon as we diagnose their being incurable. All stages of life, including the severely deformed, including newborn babies. And 6, of course, the economic motive. It's too expensive to keep these useless eaters, these hopelessly ill, incurable idiots. It's just too expensive to keep them alive, so kill them, with or without their consent. Okay, and as Father William Smith used to say, the right to die soon becomes the duty to die. It's an important, it's one of his little axioms. The right to die has become the duty to die. So, as I said, we live in a time when the image has replaced the concept. People see, and I think probably the number one historical thing that's talked about on PBS is World War II and the concentration camps, what was done to the Jews. Okay, they want to talk about that, that's fine, but they only see the image, they only see the end result of all of these bad principles, all these anti-life principles. The same anti-life principles that are in operation right now. Through Obamacare, the question of cost, and of course what we talked about with California medicine, the shift from recognizing the inherent value of human life to the relative value of human life. So tomorrow we'll close this section on euthanasia, talking about how modern governments are following this Binding and Hawk outline, and also how legalized euthanasia destroys the medical profession. And so that'll be all we have to say about euthanasia. Then we'll move on to divorce and birth control.